The Kids in the Hall is a Canadian comedy troupe which rose to prominence in the late 80s and early 90s. The troupe consists of 5 main members: Dave Foley, Kevin McDonald, Bruce McCullough, Mark McKinney, and Scott Thompson. Originally performed live on stages in Toronto, The Kids in the Hall eventually were noticed by Saturday Night Live creator Lorne Michaels, who decided the work of the kids deserved to be televised. Over the next few decades, The Kids in the Hall received international attention, leading to the production of not only their original TV show, but a movie, a mini-series, several live tours, and a televised reboot premiering in 2022. That last one is what I'm here to talk about today. Anyone who watched my Slings and Arrows video might have seen this video coming, as there I proclaimed my love for The Kids in the Hall and my excitement for this new series. I'm a big sketch comedy fan, and as much as I love Monty Python, In Living Color, Mr. Show, Tim and Eric, The Dave Chappelle Show, Derek Comedy, and many others, The Kids in the Hall still stands as my personal favorite sketch show and troupe. The 5 men behind the series are, in my opinion, responsible for some of the best writing and acting I've ever seen in sketch comedy. Not every sketch they've written works equally as well, but much like Monty Python, even when a skit doesn't work, there's a huge respect for the craft involved, and the acting is always spot on. I've been fortunate enough to see the troupe perform live in 2015, which was a fantastic experience. I also really enjoyed both the movie Brain Candy and the miniseries Death Comes to Town, which I know are polarizing among Kids in the Hall fans. Pretty much anything the kids put their name on, I'm willing to give a fair shake, and this new series is no exception. I held off on reviewing this new series around its release date, as I wanted to let my experience and opinion of the show sink in before I really took a look at it. Let me state my overall opinion first. I think this new series is really good. I have a few contentions here and there, but for someone who is hyped for the series, I thought I was able to stick the landing more often than not. I don't think this new series is necessarily the kids at their best, but I do think it's a worthy addition to their body of work, which in itself is a huge accomplishment. Good sketch comedy is kind of scarce for television shows in this day and age, so it's really nice to see some old masters come out of retirement and give the medium another round. So I definitely recommend giving this series a watch. However, that is coming from my perspective as an established Kids in the Hall fan. I can also say that if you were not a fan of the original series, this new season is probably not going to win you over. The tricky part is whether or not I can recommend this to someone who is uninitiated with the Kids in the Hall. The brand of comedy that this troupe is known for is already kind of polarizing to begin with. It's weird, offbeat, silly, and equally as brilliant as it is stupid. Not only that, this series has a lot of callbacks to both the original series and the film Brain Candy, which probably won't land as much if you're not familiar with the references. For example, the original Kids in the Hall ended with the 5 members being buried alive, and this new series has a skit of them being dug up and resurrected. I thought that reference was hilarious, but someone who didn't see the original series finale probably isn't going to find it that funny. Not all of the sketches feature callbacks like this, so this series might still work for some newcomers, but personally, I wouldn't suggest delving into this series blind. I'd recommend going back to check out the old show first, and if you've never seen The Kids in the Hall, you kind of owe it to yourself to do that anyway. On that note, before I get into the sketches themselves, let me talk about the format of this new series, as that's one of the aspects I have mixed feelings about. This series for the most part has the same skeleton as the original show, with the same iconic theme song and black and white shots of the kids walking around Toronto between skits. This in itself is great and was really effective at hitting me in my nostalgia sweet spot. However, the formats of the skits themselves are a little bit different, with no live audience or laugh track present in the show. One thing I really liked about the original Kids in the Hall is how it had a mix of more basic, low-budget live performance skits and highly produced cinematic skits. This new series doesn't contain any live performance sketches, which in itself is not a problem. Laugh tracks are pretty antiquated, and it's obviously been very difficult to hold live tapings in recent years, so I'm not faulting them for that. However, when you're using the same theme song and sketch transitions as the original series, and constantly making callbacks, it can feel a little bit jarring. I never had this problem with either Brain Candy or Death Comes to Town, as those were formatted completely differently from the original series. This new series is called The Kids in the Hall, and could be considered the show's belated 6th season due to its title and format. I would have preferred something more akin to the approach of With Bob and David, which wisely differentiated itself by not presenting that series as a new season of Mr. Show. By no means does this ruin the experience of the new Kids in the Hall, and it might be more of a personal gripe that only sticks out to me, me, so let me know what you guys think on the matter. With that little mini rant over, let's talk about the quality of the show itself, which I'm much more positive towards. If you're a fan of The Kids in the Hall, this show is chock full of fan service in more way than one. Fans of The Kids in the Hall may nitpick that this character or that character didn't reappear, but overall, there are more than enough returners that'll make the fan base happy. There's also a really good mix of characters returning from the old show and new characters in situations created for this series. I always felt the core of the Kids in the Hall sketches were their weird but oddly endearing characters, and thankfully, that hasn't changed in the slightest. I love how you can never really predict how one character is going to react to another character. Also like the old show, every episode contains a running sketch that plays roughly 3 or 4 times before an episode is over. These can usually be the strongest or weakest parts of the episode depending on how funny the running skit is. Not all of the jokes land, which is also true of the original series, but the show does a great job at keeping you at the very least interested with its weird and off-the-wall writing. I will say that I did watch this series all in one day, and in the second half of the season I wasn't laughing as much as I was during the first half. This wasn't because the skits in the second half were worse than the first half, but because I consumed too much of it all at once. I don't think the series necessarily needs to be binged, despite Amazon releasing it all in one day, so I'd recommend maybe spacing out the time between viewing episodes a little so it never loses its momentum. The cast of the show is much older now, but they show the same great comedic timing in their acting as they ever did. This came as no surprise to me, as I was lucky enough to see them live a few years ago. Dave Foley has the same lovable charisma, Kevin McDonald has the same hilarious high-pitched voice, Bruce McCulloch can still sing really well, Mark McKinney is still an amazing character actor, and Scott Thompson still does a phenomenal job monologuing. Because of this, the show retains the same indie quality and feels like it always has. What I really love is that you can tell by the way their skets are written that the kids are purely writing for what they think is funny, rather than trying to conform to what a new generation would think is funny. This was true in the 80s, and it's still true today, which is amazing. Speaking of the generational gap, a lot of the humor in the new series is exploring exactly that. Obviously these 5 men aren't kids at this point, and I did kind of have a worry that the show was going to be nothing but a bunch of jabs at how old they are now. Surprisingly, not only did I not mind these jokes, but I actually think they were some of the cleverest parts of the show. The troupe plays off the fact that not only have they aged as actors, but a lot of their characters have as well. This brilliantly adds commentary about how the world itself has changed since the 90s. I love seeing the Cathys desperately clinging on to their fax machine, or watching Buddy Cole look for the world's last glory hole. I've always felt Buddy Cole deserved his own spin-off revolving around him running a bar. Now that the character's older, I actually think that the spin-off idea would work even better now. Age is not a hindrance for the Kids in the Hall, it is merely another bit of ammo in their arsenal for self-deprecating jokes, which is great to see. I'm not going to be talking about all the sketches in detail, but I really did like them in general. I also really liked how they made use of the show being more cinematic than the old series, and used a lot more camera movement and effects to emphasize their jokes. It still thankfully feels like a relatively low-budget production, which is part of the joke and fits the kids well. I'd say the tone of this series is sort of in between the original show and Brain Candy or Death Comes to Town. I think if you liked Brain Candy or Death Comes to Town, which like I said are very divisive among Kids in the Hall fans, you'll probably like this show. Even if you weren't a fan of those outings, I'd highly suggest checking this series out, as it does feel like a return to form on some level. The series ends on a really clever cliffhanger that hints at a potential second season. While the series has not been officially renewed as of yet, given the positive response it's received, I think that it's very likely that we'll see that happen. I personally really hope it does. The Kids in the Hall have such a unique voice with their comedy that it's never quite been replicated in subsequent years. Everything they make feels so unabashedly their own style, and wasn't made for any other reason than they think it's funny. In a time where a lot of media relies on half-assed pop culture references in place of actual humor, the Kids in the Hall comedy feels really pure and fresh. Whatever the case may be, I doubt we've seen the last of the Kids in the Hall, so I'll continue following them to wherever they pop up next. They still haven't let me down after all these years, and regardless of the fate of their new series, I don't think they will anytime soon. Special thanks to Hilly and Brand for being the first person to support this channel on Patreon. If you'd like to join them and support me as well, follow the links in the video description. Also be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share if you want to, and I'll be sure to see you in another video.